And now, it's time for Healing from Within with your host, Tony Valen.
Welcome to Healing from Within. I'm your host, Tony Valen. You can contact me, Tony at TonyValen.com, or visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. You can also follow the show on Twitter at TVHFW. Joining us on this week's show is Aaron Leitch. Aaron is a scholar and a spiritual seeker for nearly 3 decades. He is a member of the Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn. He is a teacher and an author. You can find Aaron at kheph777.tripod.com. You can like him on Facebook, kheph777, or follow him on Twitter at kheph777. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
How did this journey begin for you?
Oh, I guess it began for me when I was a teenager. Is when I started. Trying to get my hands on anything I could read. I practiced solitarily for a good long time. I guess up until the mid-90s, when I started really getting involved in the occult communities and various local covens and stuff like that. But it wasn't until 1998, I believe it was, that I applied to and joined the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn that you mentioned. And I think that's where my path really started. It was around that same time I joined, and that was around the same time I got my writing contract with my publisher, Llewellyn. And so it all kind of started there, right there at the late 90s, really, is where my career launched.
Very interesting. Tell us a little more about the Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn. I have never heard of them.
They were founded in the 1800s. I consider them a quasi-Masonic society. They were founded by Masons, but the reason it's quasi-Masonry is because they were very adamant that in this particular order they would allow women. They themselves. Now we're talking about late 1800s England, where Masonic orders, I mean, you couldn't throw a stone down the street without knocking into 3 or 4 different ones. And this particular order was called the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia. It was a Rosicrucian society. Some of your listeners may be aware that in Masonry, a lot of your higher grades are considered Rosicrucian orders. And Rosicrucianism is a philosophy. It's actually Christian-based. The term actually means rose cross, the rose of the cross. And it goes back to the 1600s and was around kind of when Masonry itself was getting going. So a lot of the higher grades and deeper mysteries of Masonry are caught up in the Rosicrucian brotherhood. But where it came to the SRIA in the 1800s, they were not very mystical. They were not esoteric. They were more of a research society. And these particular members, 3 of them in particular, wanted to actually practice what they were studying. They wanted to actually do Rosicrucianism is also very steeped in Hermeticism, alchemy, astrology, Qabalah, a lot of mystical, Western mystical traditions, Gnosticism, and of course, Christianity and all of this mixed together. So they actually wanted to try some of this stuff. There were rituals that they wanted to try, and they wanted to actually try the alchemy experiments and do the tarot readings and astrology readings. So they set up a little side group, another Rosicrucian group, which was similar to the SRIA. It's all this. When you think of Masons, you think of the regalia and the big staffs they carry and the ceremonies they have in their halls. It's exactly like that, but they allowed women, so they could not be regular, a Freemasonic society. And from there, they went on to become one of the most influential occult orders in history, in Western history. Much of what came from them, you may be familiar with the name Aleister Crowley. the so-called wickedest man in the world, he was actually a student of the Golden Dawn, and he broke away from them to found his own system, which was called Thelema. Thelema became very influential. Later along came Gerald Gardner. Gerald Gardner was himself involved in Thelema and had access to some of the writings of the Golden Dawn that had been published, and that became very influential in the founding of what is known as Gardnerian or British traditional Wicca. So, the Golden Dawn has had a massive influence. Their system of doing magic and their system of occult philosophy is really behind almost everything that you can pick up off the shelf and learn about today in any contemporary mystical system. So
that's very interesting.
That's who they were. They actually broke up in the early 1900s. Some of them actually held on. They splintered into separate groups. They went from being the Hermetic Order. They were just called the Esoteric Society of the Golden Dawn, and by other names. They broke off into the Stella Matutina, the Alpha Omega, just different branch orders, due to some various differences between the members. And some of them held on as long as World War II, and of course when Hitler came through, all that kind of stuff was outlawed and punishable by death. So a lot of those temples were shut down. And it turned out that at least one temple in New Zealand survived until the 1970s. 1978, I think, is when they officially closed their doors. And their temple, in fact, is still there. The last living adept of the Stella Matutina branch from the mid-1900s was living in America at the time that last temple closed. And he actually refounded a new temple here in America, in Georgia, in fact, and refounded, and that's what they named the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And that group is still alive. That's the group that I'm a member of today. And they are still very alive and active. They're actually bigger now than they were than the original group was in the 1800s.
Wow. Yeah. So through all these years, do you think that the public image of the Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn has changed? I mean, like in the past, have they been secretive or have they been public, and how were they perceived in the past as to today's day?
Well, they've got kind of a checkered history. Of course, as you said yourself, you had never heard of them until
right.
You heard of them from me. And for most of the public, that's true. Most of them have never heard of the Golden Dawn. And unfortunately, right now, there is a neo-fascist hate group in Greece that just decided on a complete coincidence to call themselves the Golden Dawn. Mm. So unfortunately, some people in the public these days, when they hear the Golden Dawn, that's immediately what they think of. And it is a pure coincidence. Their name in Greek, sounds nothing like our name, but
right.
the in English you translate the Golden Dawn. So some few people that have heard of it have heard of that instead of us. So we worry about that confusion, but it really has not been an issue that I've seen so far. I mean, people who know us know the difference. As far as public perception, like I said, when the original Order of the Golden Dawn broke up in the early 1900s, it was actually a very public debacle. It was very sensationalized. It was kind of a tabloid circus, and it was because two con artists had gotten a hold of some of the Order's documents through basically conning them out of one of the heads of the Order, and proceeded to use the Order's rituals to commit rape on underage girls. And this came out in the press, and of course, the public wasn't interested in making a distinction between the actual Order and these people who had stolen their material and done horrible things.
Wow.
The rituals were even published in the newspaper at the time. And then, of course, following on the heels of that, you have Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man in the world, and everybody loves to hate Aleister Crowley. They make heavy metal songs about the guy up until the 80s. So,
wow.
Very notorious figure. And the fact that he once was a member of the Golden Dawn, of course, there you go. There's some more of that controversy for you.
Yeah.
But of course, he was actually kicked out of the Golden Dawn. They didn't like him, so they kind of agreed with everyone about him being wicked. A lot of it was overblown, of course, but there was a lot of drama back then.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, and today, you know, it really depends on what you encounter online. There are some people out there, you know, it's the internet. I mean, if you've ever read the comment sections of a YouTube video, you know how low the internet can sink. And there are people out there that, like, you know, any group, if you put yourself out there in any way, you're going to have people come along and troll and try to start controversy and drama, and that happens with us too. But in the real world, outside of the online, you know, drama that you'll find anywhere, there's no bad connotations with the group these days. A few people who know us actually, you know, it's a very respected organization. And so it's actually going very well. It's growing very fast right now.
Well, yeah, and so let me ask you, how does the Christian community accept you guys, or see you, or do they even know about you?
That, again, it completely depends. We have got a lot of people in our order that are Catholics. We've got Protestants in the order. I mean, you know. We hold all religions in respect, you know.
Interesting.
And, yeah, you know, and one of the most famous adepts of our order from the original group in the 1800s, he was a reverend. I think he was Anglican. His name was Reverend Ayton, and he was a highly respected one. So, you know, the more esoteric-minded Christians, and of course you have, you know, your Masons, your Rosicrucians, you know, these people are. So it is very respected. It's a very scholarly community, you know. As you would expect out of something that would be quasi-Masonic.
Interesting. Yeah.
But of course, you will still run into, you know, if you go to your church on Sunday morning and ask your pastor, hey, should I go join this Golden Dawn thing? Of course, he's going to say no, absolutely not. That's a sin. Don't do that.
Right.
But he would say the same thing if you ask if he should go join a Masonic hall. He'll have the exact same problems with it. You know, it's esotericism, it's ritual, you're wearing regalia, you're carrying wands around, you're doing all sorts of stuff that just, from the mainstream Christian perspective, of course, would not be acceptable.
Yeah. And you mentioned something that I'm not familiar with that you guys practice, alchemy. What exactly is alchemy?
Alchemy, the old, you know, the stereotype of the guy sitting in his basement with a furnace trying to turn lead into gold. That's alchemy. Okay. Oh. But that's like I said, that is a stereotype of turning lead into gold. That was very popular in the Renaissance era. Some very famous people, you know, Edward Kelly and Albertus Magnus, and these just Paracelsus. These are all names of famous alchemists. And they did experiment with turning lead into gold. Of course, kings and princes and emperors were very interested in anyone who claimed they could do that trick. So they invested a lot of money into attempting to find the secret of that. But alchemy really historically is the making of medicine. Alchemy began with plant alchemy. So the witch doctor who knows how to take this herb and this stone and mix them all together, and you drink it, and whatever's ailing you get better. That's alchemy. He knows how to extract medicines out of plants. Early metallurgy was also, you know, that's where turning lead into gold comes from. It was metallurgy, the secrets of how to extract ore out of rock, how to refine it, how to make I'm spacing the words, but mixing metals together. Yeah. These were all, you know, today we take them for granted, but at the time this was all invented, you know, ancient history here. We're talking about so far back, they didn't even know how to mine the metals out of the earth. They had to wait for meteors to fall, and then they would go and find the meteor, and hey, look, there's a big chunk of iron. And then they would take that fallen star, and they would make it into a sword. And then that sword would be considered a powerful magical weapon. That's what Excalibur was that King Arthur had, was this magical sword that had been made out of a fallen star. So these were closely guarded secrets. You didn't just go to the local blacksmith and learn how to work with metal. You had to become an apprentice. You literally had to join a religion. You had to be introduced to their gods and take their initiation ceremonies and learn the art from within their religion. So this, over the thousands of years, developed into what today we know as alchemy, which is now usually a hobbyist sitting at home with a lab and, beakers and retorts and furnaces and distillers and just basically learning how to take plants and make all sorts of incredible medicines out of them. And same thing with metals. You can make medicines out of metals, and I'm sure a few of them even do still try to turn lead into gold, but I don't run into that very often.
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So it was sort of like gifts from the gods back then when they'd get the meteors and create them into all these wonderful tools or weapons.
Absolutely. And, of course, the plants were looked at the same way. These were also gifts from the gods that give us these medicines. And of course, the intoxicating plants, they would use shrooms and peyote and all sorts of other things. And so, these were all sacred. These were all sacred things. These were all connected to the god. And alchemy was basically an art by which a human being speeds up the process that nature would do over a long period of time. So basically, the making of alcohol is an alchemical process. And if you allow grain to just sit out and rot in the field, it'll produce its own. It'll sit there and rot, and it'll produce alcohol. But you can bring it into your refinery, and you can actually, your brewery, and you can speed up that process and make yourself, make some beer or wine. That's alchemy. You're extracting the spiritual essence of that plant, of the grape or of the wheat, and making a medicine, something that actually affects you.
That is interesting. I'm glad you explained that to me. That makes sense to me. Why it would be, part of the spiritual realm and whatever. Because I know that there's also a bunch of the Wiccans actually believe in doing all that too, right? They have a bunch of and those are all for healing, depending.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. See, and that's what the Golden Dawn is based on. Our system is a system of spiritual alchemy. And the processes that you would use in a lab to extract medicine out of a plant, we use ritual and esoteric symbolism to actually break down your inner self and refine the inner. It's interesting. Your show is called Healing from Within. Well, that's what we do. We break down and refine your essence, your spirit, and then empower it. And basically, we are taking the lead that is you when you come to us, and over the course of going up through our grades in our system, you become gold. You're refined into gold. That is really the heart and the soul of what we do.
And when you provide the healing, like you were talking about, is this in a sense physically or spiritually? Like I know that healers that I've spoken to in the past in our line of work, they heal but with energy, and it has to do with chakras and whatever. Or how does it work with what you guys do?
Yeah, what you're describing is the practice of healing. Mm-hmm. And once you go through our grade structure, and you reach what is called, we have an outer and an inner order. So you join the Golden Dawn, that's the outer order, and those are the grades. You go up through the grades, you're taking initiations. It's just like Masonry, and each one is an inner healing. It is you are literally broken down. We base our system on the 4 elements, which of course Wicca picked up later. And you are literally broken down, spiritually speaking, into your 4 elemental essences. So your passion is fire, your emotions are water, your intellect is air, and your body is earth. And this is all ritually, ceremonially broken down and then put through purification processes, which are not necessarily pleasant, but it takes place over a very long period of time. I mean, if you really, really worked hard to get through the grades as quickly as possible, you could do it within maybe 2 years. So it's a little bit like taking an associate program. But during that time, you are studying the material. Of course, you take the initiation rituals, which are absolutely vital, but you are also performing meditations and rituals and things at home that are part of the process, part of the inner healing, and the part of the what we call rectification of the spirit, putting yourself back to right. But actual healing, working with energy directly on a person, that would be a specialized practice, and that would be something you might do once you've gone through the grades and gone into our inner order. Then people tend to specialize in different facets of magic, and healing is one of them. You could specialize in.
Really? What are the other facets of magic that people would specialize in?
It's really open. I mean, as much as there is out there to study. Of course, I'm known for being a specialist of the Grimoires and the Solomonic tradition and the Enochian tradition. There are expert astrologers that are in our inner order, expert tarot readers, scryers, healers. People study entirely different traditions. There are people who go from us and then they start studying Buddhism, or some of the Arabic systems, or Sufism, there's no restriction really on what it is that you privately want to study and practice once you reach the inner order.
Huh. Very interesting. Just to let our listeners know, you're listening to Healing from Within with Tony Valen. You can contact me directly, tony@tonyvalen.com. You can visit our website, healingfromwithin.net, or follow our show on Twitter @TVHFW. And you can also get more information on Aaron at kheph77.tripod.net. That's his website. You can find him on kheph777, or you can follow him on Twitter at kheph77. Did I get all that right, Aaron?
It's always a 777.
The 777. Perfect.
It's always KHEPH 777.
777. Thank you. That's an easier way of saying it too. I also know that you are an author and a contributor to many books. Can you tell us about the books you have written so far?
Yeah, most of them are on the subjects I just mentioned, the Solomonic Grimoires and Enochian Magic. Those are they're older than the Golden Dawn. They are medieval and Renaissance magical texts. They were they're kind of shadowy, honestly. The church was very against them, burned a lot of them. If you were caught with one of them in your possession, this was during the times of the Inquisition, so you could be tortured and killed for having them. But even though the church was doing that, it was also people within the church that were actually writing the grimoires. They came, quite a bit of them came out of the exorcist tradition. Back in those days, exorcist was actually an order in the Catholic Church. So you could, be ordained a priest and then decide that exorcism is your thing, and then you could actually go and they would ordain you as an exorcist, and they would give you the ritual Romanum, the big exorcism ritual, like you saw the guy using in the movie Exorcist, and the holy water sprinklers and all that, and they would actually ordain you as an exorcist, and that would be your job. And these guys were largely faith healers. I mean, there were no hospitals back then. If you got sick, you had a choice. You could either go out of town to the local witch, the local healer, or you could go to the church, and the exorcist would come out and lay hands on you and try to cure you. So they were faith healers, and because they were very charismatic, and because they actually dealt with real life problems with real life people, they tended to be kind of mavericks. They tended to use what really worked, regardless of what church dogma said. And they started recording their practices, and they were very interested in any information they could find on how to command spirits and how to exorcise spirits, not just to exorcise them out of people and places, but also to put them to work and make them do things for you. And this was very frowned upon by the church. So that was the origin. Now, not all of the authors of the Grimoires were low-level priests. Some of them were scholars, and scholars and academics, and it was kind of a very intellectual Western high-class kind of thing to do, or to be interested in and be involved in, because it was a literary tradition. It was based on its books. You have very famous grimoires. Grimoire, by the way, means a manual. It's a French word. It just means textbook. And the Magickal Grimoires were where these guys recorded their instructions for all the rituals that they used. And it was a literate tradition, and that was the Western mystery tradition. Masonry had not really evolved yet. Rosicrucianism had not appeared yet. So all of these things that you think of when you think of Western mystery, they didn't exist yet. What existed were these grimoires, these secret magical texts that you had to hide away and hope that the authorities didn't find them. And so it was a very different magical tradition that we see today in like Wicca or even Thelema or the Golden Dawn. It was a much more shamanic, it was more witchcraft than it was any kind of ceremonial magic. So that's the tradition I specialize in, is that old. And they dealt with calling down archangels. They dealt with commanding spirits, making talismans. So that, and the Enochian tradition is actually part of that tradition. The difference is that rather than it being based on, you don't have the Key of Solomon, instead you have the Book of Enoch. So in the Enochian tradition, it's all based on the prophet Enoch rather than it being based on the legends of Solomon. But they're essentially the same. They are still, the Enochian system is another method of summoning angels, exorcising spirits, and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. And how did you go about researching for your books? Because it seems like everything you were talking about was very secretive, and if there was any record of it, it would be very hard to find, or at least that's what I think.
Well, it really depends on where you're looking. They burned thousands of those books back then, but they were not able to eradicate them, and they survived. In fact, the Masons had a lot to do with the survival of the books, because the books that weren't found and burned very often ended up on dusty old library shelves in Masonic, collections, or at the British Museum, or the Library de l'Arsenal in Paris. So these books still existed. But when I wrote my material, what didn't exist was any information on how to use them. You get these old magical texts, and they're telling you, okay, take the brain of an eagle and the tongue of a basilisk and the shavings of the horn of a unicorn and mix them all together under the light of the moon and say these words and then, put it all in water and then drink the water. It's really bizarre stuff if you come at it from a modern Western perspective. If you're more used to Wicca and Golden Dawn and ceremonial magic and stuff. Today we tend to have a very psychological view of our magic. We don't really look at it as real. We don't look at the angels and spirits as real. These are objective beings that I'm summoning from heaven in order to help me. We tend to interpret things as, this angel is really just a part of my psychic, my psyche. He represents, this part of me, and by summoning him, I'm just really accessing that part of me. But these old books don't work that way. They're designed, they're written by people who did believe these beings were real, and they treat them as real, and there's a lot of protocol involved in interacting with an angel. If you really believe that an angel is a real being, then there is a way you must interact with them, to do it right and safely. So, you see all these books, and what you find in that material is shocking, and it doesn't make a lot of sense from that modern psychological perspective. And so that was lacking. Any explanation as to the worldview of what these men were thinking when they wrote these books. Yeah. And so, most of my research was, of course, the books themselves, but I also had to do a lot of research, not just academically, but experientially, with parallel systems of ancient magic, Santeria, Ptolemaic, traditions that go back, voodoo, traditions that actually go back to Africa, that have been around for thousands of years. You've got the Brujeras in Mexico. You've got Native American shamans. You've got all of these traditions that I had to look into, and I actually got very involved with the African communities. One of my teachers and very close friends is a Santo who's known as Oshanilele. He publishes a lot of books. If you have any listeners that know it. If you have any listeners that know about Santeria, they probably know that name, and they probably both love and hate him. He was an incredible. He was an incredible teacher, and he was willing to share things that he was really not supposed to be sharing as an initiate of that religion. And I learned a lot about the old magic, about how magic was viewed at the same time as these grimoires were being written. So I actually got to, with Oshani Lele, I could actually just bring the grimoires to him. I encountered some instruction that just made no sense to me, and I could bring it to him. Why do I need the brain of a frog to make sense? What is it trying to tell me here? And he would say, oh yeah, we do that, and here's why. And he would say why they do it in his tradition. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Now this book makes sense. I now understand why he's doing that weird thing. And by doing this over and over the course of months and years, I finally cracked into the unwritten part of the written grimoires. The stuff that the guy who wrote the grimoire just took as given, so he didn't even bother recording. And that is how I was able to put together. I would say that's how I began. That's how I started to put together. That's why my first book was called Secrets of the Magickal Grimoires, because it was all the stuff, all the unwritten stuff that you needed to know. And I wrote that book because that's what I wanted, and that book didn't exist. So that was my concept, was to write the book that I wanted.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful. It's sort of like the reason why I came up with this show. This is what I wanted to present to the audience. So let me ask you, Santeria, this Santeria guy seemed to have shared with you, which is very uncommon. Why do you think he shared with you?
It's just his personality. He's an Aquarian, and he's just a very outgoing guy who can't keep his mouth shut. And the reason I said that if anyone in the audience knows his name, they probably both love and hate him, is because, and I also mentioned that he publishes a lot. He has written incredible books. He wrote a book called The Sacrificial Ceremonies of Santeria, where he not only explains how and why they do animal sacrifice and the struggle that their religion has gone through over the years to be able to continue practicing their religion without legal persecution, but he also gives the ritual that they use in detail. He says, here it is. So you don't have to wonder what we're doing behind closed doors anymore. Here it is. So, and all of his books are that way. And this is stuff that no one has been jealously guarded for hundreds of years. And he's just publishing it. So he's loved and hated because, on the one hand, he's publishing and sharing material he's not supposed to be. Yeah. But on the other hand, I see people say, okay, so you hate this guy, but should I buy his books? And they always say, well, yeah, you should. Because whether or not he should be publishing them, they respect that what he's publishing is the real deal. I've never heard anyone accuse him of just making stuff up or being wrong about what he's publishing. They're mad at him because he's publishing what's real and what's true. So he's a force of nature. That is the best way to explain him. And he's just going to do and publish what he's going to do and publish.
Yeah, and what was his name again? And can you spell it out in case anyone wants to look up information on him?
Yeah, you'll find him, and he's on Facebook too. It's Ochani, Oshani, and then the next word is Lele, Oshani Lele.
Oshani Lele. Now, Oshani means something in Santeria, because I think Oshani sounds like a general word that I've heard before. Is it a title?
You've probably heard of Oshun, which is one of their highest gods.
Yes.
Like I think it is their high. No. That's not their highest god, but it is one. It's a pretty important orisha or god. But I swear I asked him once, and I don't remember what his response was, but I don't believe that it was actually related to that god. So I don't recall what it actually means.
Okay. So coming back to you, you have the two books that we talked about, but I know that altogether you have 4 books. You want to tell everyone else about the other 2 books?
Well, the other 2 books are kind of part of a series with the 3rd book, which was the Essential Enochian Grimoire. And the first 2 actually, the Enochian System was first recorded in the late 1500s by a very famous Elizabethan scholar, John Dee. If you encounter his name, you'll see him mentioned. He was Queen Elizabeth I's primary advisor. He was her spiritual advisor. He was her court astrologer. He was kind of the Merlin to her Arthur. And he was very influential in England. He was right there at the founding. In fact, he coined the term British Empire. He was right there at the founding of the British Empire. And He was not only one of the world's most highly educated and respected scholars, mathematicians, astronomers, navigators, cryptographers. I mean, the man did everything, but he was also a mystic, and he recorded journal after journal of scrying sessions between him and a scryer named Edward Kelly, who I mentioned before, who was a famous alchemist. He and Edward Kelly scryed angels and received an entire system that is today called the Enochian System. And it's a lot like the old Grimoires, and it has other influences as well. But it's all based on the concept of the prophet Enoch, who went up into heaven and recorded mysteries out of the great book of life and then brought them back to earth. And then those mysteries were supposedly lost in the flood. And then the angels came back in the 1500s to talk to John Dee and redeliver those mysteries. And that's the Enochian System. And one of the main portions of this system that he received from these angels was the Angelical Language. The angels said, "We're going to teach you our language," and here it is. And they gave him his alphabet. They gave him a book, a very lengthy book that's written entirely in the language that to this day the world's greatest cryptographers have been unable to translate. And they gave him a series of 48 poems or invocations for the angels. They're also written in that language, but for those they gave translation. And those are basically the heart of the system. Those calls, those poems, are how you make contact with the angels of the system. And the two books that we haven't really talked much about, the Angelical Language, are entirely dedicated just to that language. Everything I could learn. I set out to learn the language as fluently as humanly possible. And it was a 10-year project, and those two books are the result of that.
Wow. And if listeners were interested in the books and they want to read the books, where can they find them?
Well, you can find them anywhere. They'll be in any bookstore or can be ordered in any bookstore if any of those still exist. You can get them on Amazon.com, of course. And my publisher is Llewellyn Worldwide, and that's the best place to get the books, is directly from the publisher. You can go to Llewellyn.com and just search for my last name, Leitch, and you'll go to my author's page, and all of my full-length books that I've written are right there.
Got it. And Llewellyn is spelled?
Llewellyn.
Perfect. Thank you. And I know that also your wife, who works closely with you, also does tarot readings. Where do you guys work out of, or how is there a physical place where you guys do your work?
There is. There's a local store here in the Tampa area. It's called Mystical Sense. Mystical spelled with a K. Mystical Sense, and it's an occult bookstore or an occult shop. And my wife, her name is Carrie Michael, and she gives readings there. Her regular day is Wednesday every week, and she also fills in on other days when other readers can't make it. So you'll often find her up there on Saturdays as well. And we also, the two of us, also give classes. I have a series of ceremonial magic classes, which are based in the Golden Dawn, not the Solomonic style. It's Golden Dawn magic. And we give those about 2 times a year out of the store, in the spring and the fall. In fact, tomorrow is our first class of the fall session.
Yeah. And in your classes, what do you teach people? Give me a little more depth about what you teach people, so that you know. And the other question also is: are these classes online as well?
They're not online yet because the classes are very hands-on oriented. We are working to try to figure out how to make a version of these classes work in an online format. So we will be releasing those eventually. Other exciting news is there are a couple of other adepts, higher members of my order in other states that are gearing up to teach the same classes. So it won't be too much longer. You'll be able to take my class even if you live in another city somewhere.
Wow.
So that's going to be, and that'll be, again, live. That won't be online. That'll be live. It'll be hands-on. You'll have, you just like with me and my wife when we're teaching, you'll have your instructor right there showing you how to do the rituals, showing you how to do things properly, correcting and critiquing you, and so you'll have that, you have that advantage.
Right.
As for what we teach, like I said, it is based on Golden Dawn. It's not traditional Golden Dawn. It's not what you would get if you come and join my order. But it is just a basic kind of a crash course in ceremonial Golden Dawn style ceremonial magic. We start right out from the first class is just telling you the history, what Hermeticism and Rosicrucianism is, and some of the stuff we've talked about here is actually in that class, and what alchemy is. And then I, start right off by teaching you a very simple little ritual to do. And from that point, it's a 6-week class, and from that point forward, each class just adds more to it. And you actually perform more and more ritual, daily exercises, until finally, in the last couple of classes, you actually consecrate a talisman to actually have a real effect in your life. And on the very final class, we all come together and we do actually evoke an archangel and have an experience with that angel.
Well, Aaron, I just want to say that this has been a very, very interesting talk with you, and I have learned quite a bit. And I feel like I should bring you back on again, and so we can talk some more, and bring your wife on also so she can talk. Our special thanks to Aaron Leitch for being on this week's show. You can get a hold of Aaron through his website, kheph777.tripod.net. You can like him on Facebook, kheph777, or follow him on Twitter at kheph777. Please contact me directly, Tony at TonyValen.com. Visit our website, www.healingfromwithin.net, and follow our show on Twitter at TVHFW. Thank you so much, and you all have a blessed week.